All right, everyone. I want to talk to you guys some more about the Roman Jewish conflict. I have been doing a series of videos on this subject and my commentary on it, and I'm going to continue to do videos on this subject until I am done reading Josephus's history on the Roman Jewish War. This is, and I know this is obvious, but this is a very, very graphic and bloody book. It's extremely graphic. It's extremely violent. It's very gory. There are a lot of gory, nitty gritty details in this book. It's almost like watching a horror movie, only it's worse because it's real. In this war, the Jews refused to surrender. Throughout the conflict, the Jews are extremely stubborn. They're very adamant about fighting against Rome, and they would rather die than surrender to the Romans. And there are many instances in Josephus's history of mass suicide that is done. There's even one story that Josephus recounts in which the Jews tell him, a group of Jewish radicals tell Josephus, because you surrendered your city to the Romans, you, for the glory of your ancestors, must kill yourself. So, of course, Josephus didn't commit suicide. I mean, he would not have written this book if he did. But it's really a testament to just how fanatical the atmosphere was in ancient Judea. And it really does give you some idea as to how crazy people were in the time of Christ. This is the type of society that Christ was living in. It was fanatical, it was violent, it was extremely nationalistic, and it was also very tribalistic. This is why Christ would tell the Jewish leaders, "Hey, this Roman centurion has more faith than any of you, anyone in all of Judea, anyone in all of Jerusalem. This Roman centurion has more faith than anyone." And there's a reason why Christ spoke that way, because he was confronting the ultra nationalism of the people. So the Romans, they're surrounding the city. And, well, they have already surrounded the city, and they have built walls around the city in order to prevent people from escaping, actually. They're locking them in the city. And there is mass starvation in the city of Jerusalem. And it comes to the point where people are literally cannibalizing their own children. And Josephus recounts one specific story in which a woman by the name of Mary, and Mary is simply an anglicization of the Semitic name Mariam. But this woman, Mary, she is a Jewish woman who lives in Jordan, and she is from a village called, I think it's called Beseddu. I think it's something like that. But anyway, she decides to go to Jerusalem. And Josephus does not specify why she wanted to go to Jerusalem, but Josephus tells us that she fled to Jerusalem, but doesn't tell us why. So she flees to Jerusalem, and she comes from a very, very wealthy family. This woman comes from a very wealthy family. And so she brings some food with her. And I guess she didn't know that Jerusalem at this time was in a huge famine. And fanatics were controlling the city. So she goes to Jerusalem. And I guess maybe she thought it was her duty as a Hebrew to go to Jerusalem. I don't know. But she goes to the city. And when she reaches the gates of the city, the rebels take all of her food. And this was policy. This was part of the policy of the rebel faction ruling Jerusalem. They would steal everyone else's food. They would break into people's homes, and if you had food, they would steal it from you. If you resisted, they'd kill you. It was really that horrific. So they steal her food, and she starts screaming at them. And Josephus tells us that she started yelling at them. Why are you stealing my food? And they don't say anything to her. They don't do anything to her. They just go on their way. So she goes to her home in Jerusalem because she obviously, being from a wealthy family, had her own property in the city. She goes to her home, and she has a baby with her. She is a mother, and she's starving. She is stuck in the city of Jerusalem. She was better off just staying in Jordan, but she's stuck in Jerusalem. And some thieves break into her home. And as soon as they break into her home, they smell the smell of burning flesh. Now, I have never personally experienced the smell of burning flesh, but I have heard that it is one of the most, if not the most, horrid smell that you will ever inhale into your nostrils. Years ago, I had a teacher who was a former police officer, and he told us that he one time entered a crime scene in which there were some burned bodies. And he said that if you have not smelled the smell of burning flesh, it is utterly horrific. It's one of the worst things you will ever smell. So these two thieves, they break into this woman's home, and immediately they are confronted with the smell of burning flesh. And they grab this woman and they say, "We will slit your throat if you don't tell us where the food is." So she opens up her oven and she pulls out half of what was her baby's corpse. Half of what was her baby, I should say, because she put her baby in the oven. She baked her baby. I mean, she killed her baby before. She didn't bake it alive, but she put her baby in the oven, baked it, and then she ate half of the body. And she tells these thieves, "This is the body of my own son. This is the body of my own son. And if you wish to eat of it, then eat of it. But if not, then let me be and let me eat of this flesh." And the thieves ran away. Now you could say, well, this is just one incident. But Josephus tells us that this was ongoing throughout the city of Jerusalem. People were eating the flesh of their own children. And as I was reading this, I was thinking to myself, the Son of God said, "This is my flesh. Take of it, eat of it. This is my blood. Drink of it." God the Father sent his Son to die for the sins of mankind. He sent his only Son to earth that mankind may eat of his flesh for redemption. But Judea, for the most part, rejected the flesh of Christ. And reading this story, it was as if God was saying, and Josephus does say several times that God was the one who brought this punishment to the Judeans. But it was as if to say that God was telling the Judeans, because you rejected the flesh of my son, you will now eat the flesh of your sons. And in the midst of this battle, the Jews, they set up a trap for the Roman soldiers. They went to one of the sections of the temple, and they pretended to do some kind of construction in one part of the temple. And they surrounded this part of the temple, the interior of this part of the temple, with bitumen, with essentially pitch or petroleum. This stuff is extremely flammable, and some of the Roman soldiers saw an opportunity to attack these Judeans, and so the Roman soldiers, not all of them, but the ones who fell for the trap, they charged into this part of the temple. The Jews ran away, and they set this part of the temple on fire, and many of the Romans died. So this is actually how the fire that would destroy the temple began. A lot of people have this misconception that, well, the Romans just came and burned the temple. Well, they did, yes, but at the same time, the fire was started by the Jewish rebels. So Titus, the general who was really, also the Caesar of the Roman Empire, he didn't want to destroy the temple, because Titus, being a commander for the Romans and being the Caesar, he had to fight for the interest of Rome. And part of the interest of Rome was to take and control territory and to maintain that control over that territory. So he didn't want to lose control over Judea. And he knew that if you destroy the temple, that it would completely ruin relations between the Jews and the Romans. And it would be nearly impossible to control Judea. So he wanted to keep the temple there so that the Jews would have their religious holy site in order to effectively maintain Roman control. But there was a number of Roman garrisons that hated the Jews. I mean, they really hated them. For personal reasons, they hated them because they didn't like the way that they acted, or a lot of Roman soldiers died, and so they had a vendetta. And this is something that's very common in war. Soldiers die, and so the soldiers who see their fellow soldiers being killed, they have such rage and anger that there's no controlling them. There's no stopping them. We saw things like this happen in Iraq and Afghanistan, etc. So these Roman soldiers, they just went ballistic, and some of them began to take the fire that was already in the temple, and they began to expand it. They took some of the fire that was already in the temple, and they began to burn other parts of it. So they spread the fire. And the Jews, seeing their temple being burned further, being set to the flames further, they just lost their minds. And the Romans eventually bursted into the temple, and they killed everyone that they saw. There was no mercy, there was no quarter. Everybody died. Titus eventually enters the temple, but by then it was too late. Bodies are all over the floor, and the steps leading up to the altar of the temple are literally covered in human blood. And then when you got up to the altar, you would see the altar, a pile of bodies on top of the altar with blood everywhere. It was completely horrific. The whole thing's a nightmare. But it really goes to show you, when Jesus was walking up to Golgotha, carrying the cross, and he saw women weeping, he said, "Don't weep for me, weep for your children." This is the horror that Christ warned them about. And there's a story you can read in the New Testament where the disciples walk up to Christ and they tell him something like, "Look, Christ, look how beautiful these buildings are." They marveled at these buildings because the architecture was obviously very impressive. I mean, Titus himself, upon seeing the temple, he stated that he had never seen anything like it. He said that the temple of the Jews was superior to any temple that he saw amongst the pagans. And Jesus tells the disciples, yeah, this architecture that you marvel at so much is all going down. It's all going down. Why? Because God was sick and tired of the bureaucracy. He was tired of the corruption. He was tired of the exploitation. He was tired of the racism that was going on. The Jews were using the court of the Gentiles, which is it was the part of the temple that the Gentiles could go to pray. They were using that area to make money. And Christ takes a whip out and he brings down the law. And Christ says that this temple was made to be a house of prayer for all nations, and yet you have made it into a house of thieves. And how did the Roman-Jewish war start? How did it begin? The Roman-Jewish war truly began when the Jews said that no foreigner could have a sacrifice in the temple, including the Caesar. And the Romans, hearing this, knew that that was an act of war. It was an act of sedition. But the racism of the Jews, the racism of the ancient Judeans, acted as a catalyst towards the conflict. So it began with tribalism, and it ended in utter bloodshed. And, you go to Europe today, because the religion of Moses, it continues on through the church that Christ established. You look at Europe today, Europe was the center of Christendom. It was the center of the church. Remember what Paul told the Jews in the book of Acts. He did his last and final attempt to preach to them, and they rejected what he was saying. And Paul said, I will go to the Gentiles, and they shall hear me. So Christianity spreads to Europe. It spreads to Africa as well, spreads to Asia. But Christianity finds its center in Europe, especially in Italy. And you go to Europe today, and you meet these nationalists. And I met some of them when I was in Italy. And they're Catholic in the sense that they love the architecture, they love the culture, they love the art of it all. But it doesn't really go beyond that. And so they marvel at the architecture, not realizing that the architecture is simply a means to an end. The architecture is there to bring you to awe of God. That's what it is. But we just make the architecture into an end unto itself. So the disciples told Christ, look at this beautiful architecture. And Christ says, no, it's all coming down, because it means nothing at this point. And this architecture that you see in Christendom, well, Christendom is dead, but the architecture that you see in Europe, the architecture of Christendom, we marvel at this architecture, we marvel at the artwork. But it's all for nothing if there is no zeal, if there is no spirit, if there is no will to do anything, if there's no will to do something as simple as purging the church of sexual predators, which the church is filled with. So we can look at and I remember when I was in Italy, you would meet these people who would, look at this beautiful architecture. And I was in awe of the architecture myself, don't get me wrong. But these very people, they would say that they loved this Kabbalist master. I met the mother superior of a monastery. I met her, and I heard her with my own ears. I was right behind her when she said it, that she has one of her best friends is a Kabbalist master. Her name is Sister Maria, what's her name? Maria Gloria Riva is her name. And, or is it Gloria Riva? That's what she goes by. And she's the mother superior of this monastery in Italy. And she's very much involved in the arts. She's very much so invested in the arts. She loves talking about the arts, very educated about the Christian arts. But she follows a Kabbalist. So what's happening in the Catholic Church? The Catholic Church is going down the road of the Jewish religious authorities of old. That's what's happening. And we can look at the artwork, and we can be like the disciples and say, oh, look at this wonderful architecture. Look at this wonderful artwork. Well, we're going down the road of the Judeans. So the fate of the Catholic Church, the fate of Rome, the fate of the religious authorities of Christianity, the fate of the Christian world doesn't really look good through the lens of history. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.